Hello, Garland Nixon here with Laith Marouf. There is a lot going on in the world, and quite frankly, I believe that the majority of it is connected to empire, which of course means occupied Palestine. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here with Laith Marouf. And first, before we get going, we want to remind you about his website. It's freepalestine.video, right?
Yes.
Freepalestine.video. And of course, as you know, they're always having issues where they're being hassled, they're being hacked, they're having equipment issues, mysterious equipment issues as a result of, hacking and other things. So please go to freepalestine.video. And when you're there, there's a lot of really good information, of course. And please donate. They're always having to replace stuff and buy new stuff and travel around. So freepalestine.video is Laith's website. They're doing, go there, share that on all your social media platforms. Check out all the great video, all the great information if you really want to know what's going on. And you can see it all in the English language. Freepalestine.video. Laith, welcome back.
Great to be with you, Garland.
One of the things I want to talk about now is empire. The interesting thing about the U.S., the Roman called itself the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Greek Empire. They all just plain out and said, we're an empire. Yeah, like it or not, it is. You know what you got. The interesting thing about the U.S. as an empire was it was an empire that had to pretend that it wasn't an empire. It had to say to the people, we're doing all these things. An empire usually says, hey, we're taking another country and we're going to grab their gold. The U.S. says we're going over there to help out the LGBTQ people and the women and women rights. And oh, by the way, they need democracy. So it was built on lies internally. And what has happened recently, both in Ukraine and in occupied Palestine and throughout the Middle East, in Syria, et cetera, is the worst possible thing for this particular empire is the lies are being exposed to the world and to the people internally, even worse. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously at the end of World War II, there was two only sovereigns, the Soviet Union and the United States. And what the Soviet Union was pitching to the rest of the world is decolonization and freedom from colonial rule. And what the U.S. had at that point to play that game. And so they were pitting, on pretending that they're not going to continue the history of the British and French and other occupations that they ended up inheriting, but that they will be giving freedoms and democracy versus the communism and communal, actions of the Soviet Union. And that lasted for a while. And of course, we know much of the decolonization movements in Africa and Latin America had to face off with the United States over that period. And at the end of the Soviet Union existence by the 1990s, I think we began to see the shift of the United States from this game. There was no more anymore like an ideology that it had to compete with. And we saw an expansion of the US holdings, beginning with, Somalia, Yugoslavia, Iraq, and blah, 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 blah. And at this moment, I think all the propaganda that was built up over these 80 years since the end of World War II about democracy, human rights, international law, have now lost their luster. Everybody has been watching for at least since the 90s this mass expansion of American holdings and the mass killings and mass destruction that was happening. And finally, with the genocide in Gaza being so blatant and having all the Western capitals hiding behind the genocide and the genocidal regime of the Zionists, I think Trump coming into power, he's a symptom of the United States having to now shed away all this and go directly into imperial rule with brute force, because it doesn't work anymore, the propaganda. Look, I know a lot of people were looking at how Trump was destroying US aid and thinking, oh, well, all these people, rights and democracy and whatever. But people must understand that no matter how much Trump would have dropped into US aid and into this soft power, it would have had zero effect outcome because of specifically the genocide in Gaza. The genocide in Gaza made it impossible to use soft power anymore. So he cut all those expenses, so now he can put them into direct military force, as we see.
Yeah, good point. Here's something I wanted to ask you about. I think it's important. What has been said, the beginning of a century of humiliation for Europe. We'll be calling them the sick man, the sick man of Europe, right? For quite a long time, they're going in that direction. But what's interesting is, so the U.S. is like, I think the U.S. I think I've used this term when I saw, all of these billionaires, $1 trillion worth of people, sitting in front of at the inauguration, right? I call them the board of directors for the U.S. Incorporated, the United States Incorporated. Those were the real board of directors. And it's obvious they've decided to do some things, and they're doing a bunch of stuff, that they've decided to do. It seems to me that one of the things that they've decided to do is, you're too expensive, cut it loose. They're just cutting it loose. It's how corporations are: cost, benefit, liabilities, assets. They looked at Europe and they're like, it costs too much for the damn Brits and all of these people. Cut them loose. They're going to cut them loose. They don't care about this. All that crap about, we're inextricably linked, our special relationship. In the same way that they're like laying off a bunch of workers, they're laying off Europe, right? Here's what's interesting. To watch Europe go kicking and screaming. I'm kind of enjoying it, and particularly the Brits. They're like, all right, you know what? We're out of here. And the Brits are like, no, we got to keep fighting. And they've got like an army of like, a half a dozen guys. We'll stand up to Russia. We'll send more, but they're broke. We'll send more money. And we'll call a meeting with France and all. And they all come together and they just look at each other like a bunch of idiots. And they don't know what to do. And here's what struck me. When the British Empire crashed, they didn't have to admit that they weren't an empire anymore. They just collapsed. I mean, they just connected themselves to the U.S. empire and held on to pretend that they're an empire. And once the U.S. says, we're out of here, this is too expensive, the Brits finally have to look in the mirror and say, oh my God, we're just a little island. We're not an empire anymore. We have no power. It's all gone. You know what's funny about it? They have the accoutrements of an empire. They got some idiots running around with robes and with a bunch of stolen jewels from Africa, reminding them of once they were power in a crown. They got Buckingham Palace and a bunch of guys slumping around with a big beanie on their head. They have the accoutrements. The game's over. And they're having so much trouble admitting it. I'm kind of laughing at that.
Oh yes, and look, the remainder of the British holdings are all in the neighborhood of the U.S., like Canada, all the Caribbean nations that all have to pledge allegiance to the king, and maybe Australia and New Zealand, but everything's far away from the UK. If Trump wants to take it, and he will be taking it, and they can do nothing. They can do nothing, right? And look, some people are looking at how Trump is reapproaching Russia, and they're thinking that, well, Trump is trying to create a schism between Russia and China because he wants to have this economic war with China. But the truth of the matter is that if you look at it, it's not like what happened in the 70s when Nixon came to China to try to break them off from the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union didn't have much to offer at that time, and China was impoverished and it needed a market to sell its products. Today, China is the #1 economy in the world. Russia is the #1 economy in Europe. It's self-sustaining. It has a huge military that has defeated all the hordes of Europe at its door. So in reality, the breakup is not between China and Russia that's going to happen. As you noted, it's going to be between the Europeans and the United States. And if you look at it a little bit even deeper, at least China had in the 1970s with the Nixon situation had a future to work with. What is the United States going to do once it actually breaks off from Europe? It's cutting its losses. It's cutting its losses. It's making bettering its relationship with Russia, and it definitely cannot compete with China. It's too late right now to try to win the international markets from China. The United States can't do that. And clearly, I think, yes, the US is cutting its losses, but it will not be able to break up the relationship between China and Russia. And it's going to only actually accelerate the retreat of the US. If all of these European states fall off, and except if he starts really occupying and looting other countries, like if he loots Canada, if he goes into Greenland and so forth, maybe he can save the retreat of the United States and the collapse of the American economy while it's competing with China and Russia. But if he doesn't take these crazy bold moves to be out and out imperial, out and out occupational, colonial, he's not going to be able to compete.
And I suspect they will. I suspect that they're looking at it right now like, again, the people are in the chat arguing, it's Trump. No, it's Musk. It's the board of directors. You know what I mean? You look at a bunch of guys. Trump doesn't have that. They'd kill him. If Trump was doing any of this stuff and the board of directors did not assign him these duties and tasks, he wouldn't live a minute. You know what I mean? People don't understand that, like, the power that the Trumps and the senators, they're avatars for power. They do what they're told. Perfect example, Marco Rubio. So everybody said, Trump chose Rubio. He's the neocon. He'll backstab him. He hates Russia. He's an idiot. He hates all the. Rubio's there. He's the calmest guy. He doesn't even sound like Marco Rubio. Why? Because to me, what we're seeing is a truth. These Marco Rubio, these so-called neocon politicians stand for nothing. And when their masters say to them, your job is to hate Russia, they say, yes, sir, I hate Russia. And when Marco Rubio comes in, and I forget Trump, when Musk and from Apple and the guy from NVIDIA and the guy, you know what I mean? When Zuckerberg and all these people were billionaires say, Marco Rubio, effective today, you're friends with Russia. He smiles. Russia is my best friend. I love Russia. Peace with Russia. That's what I'm all for. You know what I mean? The truth is, if people wake up to realize this, it's right in front of them, that you're looking at puppets. Just like Zelensky, a puppet. And let me say this. Zelensky was in the UAE the other day, and people were like, oh, Zelensky's fighting back. He's standing. You know what I think? Remember when Ashraf Ghani left Afghanistan at the end, the puppet leader? What did he do? He took suitcases full of money. Where did he land? The UAE. That right now, if you ask me, Zelensky right now is saying, hey, man, how can I get out of this with live money? Well, we usually set the puppets up for the UAE. Fly over to the UAE, sign all the papers, do what you need to do. You'll get your money and your live. If I'm Zelensky, he knows the game's over, and he's an actor. He always knew it was an act. And now he's setting himself up. He knows the game. Now he's still got to walk around as an actor and say, we must stand up against Russia. He goes back and says, am I getting my money? Yeah. Can you keep me alive? Yeah. Okay. All right. I'll keep playing the game. We must stand up and fight and blah, 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 blah. And then he goes to the UAE. He's getting his money. They're all walking away. He's an actor. People forget that.
Go ahead. I keep on watching since this happened, the video of Elon Musk's son, which he called X, which is ruining the name Malcolm X for me. I know he called him X for his Twitter, but really it's ruining all that revolutionary history in the Black community in the U.S. But to see that kid telling Trump to shut the hell up, you're not the president,
Yeah, shut your mouth.
shut your mouth.
That's what he heard Musk saying to Trump just before the camera came on.
Yes. It's really, it was, and to see Trump not able to even say anything back to a little kid because his daddy, his billionaire daddy, is standing beside him.
I think, you know what I think? It looked at me like Trump was playing a tic-tac-toe or something. Musk was talking, Trump's playing, he's twiddling his thumbs, and the real power, and Musk is the point man for those people. That's all it is. But to watch Europe is hilarious because now, look, the Sahel has now the Sahel is like, get the hell out of Africa, France. So France has nothing in Africa. They've been emasculated. The Brits still had nothing. And to watch them as the US says, all right, we're getting out of here and we're just going to solve this Russia thing and we're just going to walk away. We're done with that. Forget you. Shut up. And you know what? And everybody's like, Europe's going to fall. They're going to push back. When it comes down to it, they'll do what they're told. When it comes down to
what
it,
are they going to push back with? I mean, they none of them have real armies. They all have like counterinsurgency forces, really. I mean, the biggest army in Europe is the UK, and it has like 90,000 soldiers. That's it. It's nothing. I mean, Hamas has more soldiers than the British, and the only reason that they were able to continue maintaining some control over these countries in Africa and Asia and Latin America was because of NATO and the real US power behind that. The French cannot do anything by themselves. Definitely the British can't do anything by themselves, nor I don't think the Germans, which probably have the smallest army out of those three big ones. So, and yes, the Sahel, we saw over the last few weeks, by the way, in Mali and in Burkina Faso, nationalization of their gold and uranium mines. We saw also huge projects being built right now of industrial scale in those countries that are going to lift them up from poverty. All the international corporations are being kicked out. All the international forces have already been kicked out from those countries. So the path forward, if those old colonial powers cannot reassert their by force control over Africa and Latin America and Asia, they're just going to collapse. Their products are too expensive. There's not. I think the only worth automobile that you can buy from Europe is German products. French products are so bad, like Citroën and Renault and whatever it is, and Peugeot. Nobody buys them. The British cars are all, they fall apart and they're so expensive. So what are these countries offering? They can't. They don't have new software that they're pushing on. They don't even have games, like computer games that they can compete with the Chinese, Japanese, or American output. So there's nothing really. What, cheese and wine? Lebanese wine is much better, by the way, than French wine. Chilean wine,
Georgian wine is excellent. Georgian wine, and you know what? I can ride out into Western Maryland into the mountains. I can ride into Virginia and find some pretty good wine. The truth about it is this: anywhere you got a little bit of rain and some decent weather in this world, people can produce some fairly reasonable wine. And why you have to buy it from France now?
Yes, and the cheeses. Okay, what? And what is Germany going to offer us? Sausages? I mean, come on. Kraut. Like, what the hell are they? There's nothing. I mean, the only cuisine that is edible in Europe is Italian cuisine, really. Okay, that is internationally loved. Okay, the rest of the, so they're not going to be able to even come to the U.S. to open a restaurant like a Pakistani guy does, and everybody comes to the Indian restaurant because it's tasty, right? So they can't even export labor or food or something like that. So the future is really horrible for these European countries. And I think this is where, maybe situations are going to get a little bit more dangerous on a global scale, because we're seeing already the rise of the ultra right in Europe as they lose their historical arrogance and supremacy, and they can't back that supremacy. The ultra right is going to fill that gap, and then from that point on, the Europeans will have to try to recolonize if they want to continue living this life of upper class on the global scale. And I don't think they're going to be able to deliver it. It's scary. The only scary thing is that they have nuclear weapons in France and the UK. Maybe they should be disarmed, honestly.
You know, the Russians are joking about sending in special operations team to get like the artifacts and stuff like that as the European society collapses. You know, it's like, who's going to secure the nukes and get the artifacts so people will remember that there once was a society as it collapses into some kind of a hellhole. You know, here's something else that I think is important. The country that shall not be named. Here's what I mean. There is a contradiction all throughout the U.S. empire and its vassals. Let's get to that. J.D. Vance said, look, you guys are a bunch of, you're censoring your people, and all true. Absolutely. He harassed them and he lit them up for the censorship and things of that nature. At the same time, the Trump administration is saying, you know, we have to fight anti-Semitism on campuses. So at the same time, they were accurately criticizing the Europeans for censorship of their people. They're like, you're coming to their houses and you're arresting them for stuff they put online. They're not allowed to protest. But at the same time, if you're on Columbia University saying, I'm opposed to bad treatment against the Palestinians, you can just hold up a sign with a watermelon on it that says Palestinian rights. The Trump administration is saying, well, that's not a violation. It's actually First Amendment protected speech. So what we have to do, we have to reinterpret that and call it anti-Semitism so that we can censor what is, everyone knows, First Amendment protected speech. So here's where that leaves the Europeans. They could have pointed that out because they know it as well as I do. They could have said, wait a minute, you're getting on us from censorship when you're doing censorship right now. But they can't, because throughout the empire, they're doing the same thing. The one thing that they could have smashed, they could have destroyed. As angry and upset as they were, literally crying over J.D. Vance pointing out the censorship, they could have destroyed him with their hypocrisy, saying, aren't you doing the same thing with this so-called anti-Semitism? But they can't, because that's the country that can't be mentioned. Because they've all got to do that. Like some weird religion that says no matter what they do in the country that can't be mentioned, we can't admit the truth that we're wrong here. And as you said, that's one of the things that have destroyed their ability to have soft power, that has destroyed their ability to credibly take a moral argument against anybody on this planet, because everybody's going to look at them and say, well, what about the genocide? Your thoughts?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm glad you brought up Columbia University, because I was just reading that the Minister of Education of the Zionist colony met with the president of Columbia University and is giving her dictates, and she's going to have a hotline to him.
Of course.
To how they are going to punish the uppity students that talk about Palestinian rights. So she's now not anymore accountable to the Ministry of Education of the U.S., because there's no more Ministry of Education in the U.S., right? They just shut it down. And neither the president. She's going to now go back directly to the Israeli government. This is how the Zionists are destroying higher education, not only freedom of speech. The thing that the U.S. always sold its universities about being like free speech and clashing ideas on the campus, and the best ideas come out, and now it's all a joke. People are starting really to apply to Chinese universities, by the way. There's a huge number of those international students that used to go to the US that are now switching to Chinese universities. They're not even switching to British or French universities or German universities because that's the same problem they're having there. Also, I saw today there was a Palestinian British artist, female, she's like in her 20s. She does like these murals and whatever it is. Her house got raided by the anti-terrorism squad in the UK in the middle of the night. Her children, toddlers, were terrified. They ripped everything in her house, took everything. They didn't allow her to feed her children breakfast. They didn't allow her to take them to school. And they're bullying and denigrating her in the house. So this is now happened also yesterday in Germany. Francesca, whatever her last name is, the Italian, human rights commissioner at the UN that's in charge of the Palestine file that's been, talking about the genocide. She got chased out by the police. This is a UN representative, chased out from 3 different universities in Germany, not allowed to speak. And then finally, they're in a private venue. The police crashed the private venue and banned the event from her to speak about her findings in Palestine. And then they went to a different venue, and again it got crashed. So there is no more freedom of speech anywhere in the West, specifically on this file. And clearly now we have entered a situation where inquisitions are being created. We're back to the 1500s, inquisitions against anybody that criticizes the Zionist. And now the only sacred that is not allowed to be touched is Zionism and the Zionist colony. And so this is gonna create clashes within society. I know up until now, the resistance to these inquisitions and to this outright fascism has been nonviolent. But for how long? Okay, as soon as the numbers of people being harassed become huge, it's not just the big names or the journalists like Richard Midhurst that are being picked off. Yesterday, also another person in Canada who's a writer. I know him. His name is Eve Engler.
I know him well. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, he got his home also crashed, and the police are charging him right now with harassment, and because he's replying on Twitter to Zionist freaks in Canada. So they're going to be charging him with criminal charges for replying about genocide to these Zionists that are actually calling for the mass killing of Palestinians. So you have the police forces, the government officials, the universities, the media, all collaborating in this inquisition and destruction of freedom of speech all around the West. I think, these are dark days, and it's just going to get worse, obviously.
Well, let me add this: in the U.S., the Democratic Party has been wiped out. It's been destroyed. And and when you look at everybody says, well, the Democrats can't figure out what's wrong, and they're like, well, perhaps we could have kept Biden in. Maybe we should have talked more about, I don't know, whatever, LGBTQ rights or something. They're just saying whatever they can think of. They're saying maybe it was this and that. A recent poll came out that said 26%, like 26% of the people that didn't vote for him, 26% of some group, I forgot what it was, but it was a huge group, said it was over Gaza. So they were wiped out over Gaza. And what's interesting is this: they may stay wiped out, but it's like the man who is an alcoholic. His wife leaves him, his kids won't speak to him, he loses his job, he can't drive anymore because he's had a bunch of alcohol accidents on alcohol, all these terrible, his health is going bad, everything's going wrong with him because he drinks just liquor all day, every day. And people say, you've got to fix your life, and he's willing to do anything except stop drinking his alcohol. because that's his addiction. The Democrats are willing to talk about all the other things. It's economics, it's socialism, but they can't talk about the one thing that has been proven by polls that destroyed their party. They can't come back. And to me, it's related to it's a moral failing of the highest order. This is not politics. This is morality. This is plain old people saying, man, I can't support that. We stand for the working class. You can't take a position that you stand for the working class or the minorities or anything else if you are supporting such a horrific murder of innocent people and the whole world's looking at you and you just pretend like it didn't happen. Their party is destroyed. And the Democratic Party can't come back because they can't talk about, under any circumstances, what actually the reason is. And since they can't, I don't see a way to respond. Your thoughts?
And this is true in all the Western countries, in all the imperial domains. All the political parties are on the same page, whether it's in Canada or the UK or France or so on. All the major parties are pro-genocide, are pro-Zionist. Okay, and this tells you something, and this is the same for all the mass media. Okay, so this tells you how much control and how much all of this supposed democracy is managed. Not only Trump is an actor, not only Zelensky is an actor, every politician in the Democratic Party, in the Labour Party in the UK, in the Liberal Party or the Conservative Party in Canada, they're all actors. And if me and you have enough money, I can buy one of those actors. Unfortunately, I don't have enough money. But maybe we should do an experiment and call for, let's choose one riding and buy one of these actors. Let's see. I think we can be successful.
We can raise the GoFundMe to buy a Congress member and see if maybe we get a discount on if we buy two. Buy one, get one for half price.
So it's really horrible, but this is the truth, and so we saw in those countries, in the UK, in the US, to prove that these are all actors and they don't stand for anything and they'll do whatever they're told. Both of these, the Labour or the Democrats in the US, both of them committed suicide rather than take a position that is critical of the Zionists. And that tells you that these are not real politicians that have any real positions that they stand for. They're just taking orders from the masters that own them. Musk has more say in the politics of the US than me and you. This is the truth.
Yeah. Oh, well, he wanders into the treasury and and they're like, well, a judge is going to stop him. And I said, the judges, that's for you and me. They don't apply. Musk and Cook and Bezos have decided they're going to do something in the treasury, change the monetary system. So whatever they've decided to do, they're going to do. Okay. That business about the judges, there's no judge in the United States that has authority over those people. People think that this is actually some kind of a system with rules and regulations. No one's above the law, and some people, and the judge is going to say to Bezos and Cook and Musk, and like I said, 4 or 5 guys worth $1 trillion. About 3 of them are worth $1 trillion. And people think that there's a judge that can rule against them, that there's somebody that can push back against these guys legitimately. When the treasury, it's their treasury, it ain't ours. It's their ATM. They walk in and out. The Federal Reserve, they own the Federal Reserve. It's run by banks. You know what I mean? I think what has to come off is this. What has to be removed is this mask of falsehoods over people's mind, that this is a constitutional republic or a democracy. And oh, by the way, Russia's an oligarchy and we're a constitutional republic and we're a democracy that stands for it.
Look at China. You can be a millionaire or a billionaire in China, but as long as your company takes care of the workers and continues to benefit the nation as a priority. The minute you, as a billionaire, start like wiggling your tail, playing with it, and wanting to have say over the government, they bring you to the court and you're executed.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so this is the way it should be. Yeah, okay, you want to be a billionaire, no problem, as long as you're benefiting our nation. The minute you start thinking that you own the nation, all right, tap
It's
off
Luigi time. The government does the Luigi business themselves.
themselves. And by the way, didn't Luigi get offed in the jail, or am I wrong?
You know what's interesting? There's so little talk of Luigi. You notice this? They don't really want him in the news much.
Yeah, I think I saw something about him being killed, but I'm maybe wrong, so I don't want to say something. But honestly, like the situation is really bad for representation of the people's will. You don't have to have this theatrical democracy to have real representation of people, like in China. But in the US, clearly the vast majority of American people are not represented by these billionaires and or these politicians, no matter what party they're coming from. The vast majority of people are in the US and in other countries in the world would like to take care of their family, their elders, their children, their neighbors. They would like to make sure everybody's healthy and fed. Those are like the basics that, you know, common human decency, no matter where we come from, is. And so, no matter when we talk about a conservative or liberal, people, that's what keeps is common between everybody. But nobody wants to present that, as in the politicians in the West. Nobody wants to offer that, and that is what's really, I think, driving now the possibilities of change. Let's hope, as Trump and Musk and so on go on these rampages, and as these European states start collapsing, that the populations will start to awaken to take control and have more say in how their states are run.
Yeah, they have seen nothing in Europe. That Europe will collapse into poverty. Europe is going to collapse into extreme poverty. And you know something else we're seeing. What's interesting is, look, I was thinking about this. Europe, what's his name? I forgot his name. You'll remember. Recently, was saying Europe is the garden and the rest of the world is the jungle. Remember that the
Oh,
European.
Borrell,
Yeah. Now
they
here's the interesting
yeah.
thing: the most vicious and brutal wars. World War One, where was that? World War Two, where was that? Historically, these people, the ruling elite of the Europeans, are the genocides who around the world historically. Who does most of? Almost all of them. The Europeans all around the world. They colonize. They steal. The European ruling elite have been the most brutal, vicious monsters on earth, and even against their own people, brutalizing their own people, throwing their own people into pointless wars like cordwood, no care. And look what they're doing to the Ukrainians. They propagandize them. They turn them into a bunch of Nazis because that's been a game. That has been a project to create the Nazihood since the 50s and to incubate that in Ukraine. And then they throw them out. They get them mowed down like cordwood. The European ruling elite have been the most vicious, evil, brutal people, brutal elite in the history of this world right now. And now they're the main reason they're angry. And this is what kills me. What are they angry about? Because a war might stop. If you want to make the ruling elite of the Europeans really pissed, try to stop a war somewhere, and they will go bananas. And now it's like the chickens are coming home to roost.
There's been many empires in human history, not only European ones, but the only empires that genocided people that they occupied were the Europeans and the Mongols. Okay, the Muslim empires occupied Spain and Portugal and Sicily and all of that for 800 years. Nobody was forced to convert. Nobody was killed. Okay. And this is why they lasted 800 years, the Muslims in Spain, because they were, good, occupiers. Occupation is bad forever. I'm not saying that Arabs should occupy Spain again. I don't want that. What I'm trying to say is that we have never seen uh, such kind of imperialism where instead of absorbing the populations that you occupy into your citizenship, you just cull them and loot their resources. That's been the mode mode operandi of the Western powers since 1492. Since the
If I could add one thing, and there is one, the Japanese, and that's why. What did Hitler do? He allied with the Japanese. What to this day in the Asian region, the country that is most allied with the Europeans, that it's tied, and it's like it's really an American colony, is the Japanese.
I'm really glad that you reminded me that. I almost blanked out on that one. Sorry for being a bad student here of history. But yes, the Japanese did, and they wanted to join that club of supremacy, and they did their massacres in both China and Korea, and remember, like, China is such a huge country. It's been a huge country for centuries. It's been so powerful, and the power base in Eastern Asia for millennia, but it never invaded Japan. China never invaded Japan in its whole history. China never invaded Korea in its whole history. Okay. On the other hand, we had the Japanese invade, as you mentioned there. So there's different ways that people can have mighty states that can be called empires or not, and the way that the Western powers have been doing it over the last 600 years is undefensible. You can't. You hear all these racist people say, colonialism brought so many things to the Indians and the Africans, and you're like, what are you talking about? What is the comparison? Do I see any? I mean, even the Romans were better, by the way. Our people were occupied by the Romans for 1,000 years almost. Okay, and the Romans built roads. They built, stadiums. They built monuments. They built everything that you can think about, ports and so on. What did the British build in any of their countries that they occupied, or the French in Africa and Asia? Zero, zero. They didn't give anything back to the people. So no, it's coming to an end, and the only way that the Europeans can uh, maintain some say in the future of the world is if they go totally crazy as they did before. But they don't have the money right now to build these armies that they can go on a colonial quests with.
Yeah, if they could right now, they just out and out attack Russia. They could. If they could, they'd say, okay, well, okay, Ukraine lost, let's go attack them. But they can't even do that. Russia has right now, let's face it, the most powerful army on earth as far as a ground army and their experience, and they built things. And the other thing is this. Here's something else I think interesting. We're seeing Iran really technologically growing, and once they get back economically, Iran will be a technological world power. I mean, the scientists and stuff. That's why Israel had to kill their scientists, because their scientists, their technology, the people are very, very, well educated, brilliant, smart people, and it's growing. It's going to be the technological power of one of the technological powers of the world. They've got hypersonic missiles and technology, military technology that the U.S. doesn't have. But here's the thing. Over the past, this so-called unipolar moment, while Iran, Russia, China, right, they're developing students in technology, and they're building and they're doing research and they're developing their technology. What was the U.S. doing? we're going to give country X technology, country X $1 billion tax break, a $10 billion tax break. Did they use it to develop their technology? No. They bought their own stocks so they could inflate the price of their stocks and make more money out of greed. They paid it out in dividends to the stockholders. All the money that came into the U.S., that came into this, that we printed, that came in through all kind of nefarious means around the world and into the U.S. empire and its vassals, were used to just automatically inflate their greed. That's why they're worth 400 billion, 300, one person worth more than half the country. That's why, because they could use it to arbitrarily buy back stocks, pay dividends, buy property, buy other corporations, fold them in, lay off all the workers, all of that stuff. Meanwhile, Russia and China and Iran, they're building their technology. They're putting their money back in. And so this neoliberal economic model, now they wake up and they're like, oh no, China's way ahead of us on AI. Oh, wait a minute. Russia and Iran are ahead of us on technology, on military technology. Anyway, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, there was a survey about IQ in the world that came out a couple of months ago, and number one was China, and then number two was Iran. So it's a huge shocker for everybody. And the United States is way down, and Israel is even like something in the 50 number or whatever it is. So all that talk about the chosen people and the best everything is all hyperbole. And look at what happened. Yes, we saw this genocide for 16 months, but the Zionist colony had the backing of all the West and all their military might. And they were unable to defeat Hamas. They were unable to defeat Hezbollah. Yes, they killed mass amount of people. They destroyed a lot of infrastructure and homes, but it was a standstill. And Israel, according to the new Minister of Defense, there is around almost 7,000 grieving families, he called them. He didn't want to say that there's 7,000 dead Israeli soldiers. And then there's like around 20, 30,000 injured Israeli soldiers. This is according to their admittance. I personally think they always tell half-truths.
Right.
So if it's around 7,000 that he's admitting dead, maybe let's say it's 14,000 dead Israeli soldiers.
20,000.
That this is not counting the mercenaries.
Yeah.
There was hundreds of them. And the United States itself admitted that there was 200 special forces that went into Gaza, American special forces, went into Gaza and never came out. Okay, so add to it all the special forces of every other Western capital. And we're talking, a number of probably 25, 30,000 dead, coalition soldiers, imperial soldiers, including Israeli.
In 16 months, they lost like almost half as many as they lost in Vietnam in a decade.
Exactly.
1/10 of the time.
Exactly. This is, in Vietnam, it was 60,000 American soldiers dead in 10 years. And that collapsed the American power in all of East Asia, and they had to withdraw. So, right now, the whole, and in Vietnam, it wasn't a combined force. It was maybe a few Korean soldiers. In the beginning, maybe a few French, right, that are siding with the Americans. But, right, we saw the combined might of the West unable to defeat the Palestinian people. And it was a resounding, really, if we count it in those numbers, a resounding defeat for the Israelis. So what is Europe going to do to face Russia? Can it really face Russia? It can't. Can they face China? They can't, definitely. Iran has to protect itself because, of course, the Zionists are going crazy, and they may do something crazy that could trigger nuclear holocaust at any moment, because they are seeing how defeated they are, that the only power they have as Zionists is to kill children and unarmed civilians. But when they're faced on this, face-to-face warriors, they're getting their whooping. Which reminds me, yesterday there was a synagogue in New York that was trying to sell Palestinian land in the West Bank and Gaza, and there was a demonstration called by American Palestinians and others near the synagogue, and the Bitar movement, which is like the fascist Zionist in the United States, came out to beat up the nonviolent demonstrators, and they got a whooping. They got a whooping. It was man to man, and they got a whooping to the point where the New York police had to intervene to save them. Okay, why? Because they didn't have air cover. There was no F-16s or F-35s bombing the other side. So this is how defeated they are, and I don't know where they can go from there.
I will say this. I think the U.S. empire realizes. I think the corporate guys don't have any. The guys I keep calling the CEOs, the board of directors, they don't have. They're about money. They don't have any skin in this thing. I don't think it was an accident. I don't think. Look, usually they have these kinds of meetings when they're going to end a war in like Switzerland. You know what I mean? They always have them in Switzerland, right? I don't think it was an accident that it was in Saudi Arabia. I think that we lost in Ukraine. Getting out of that. There ain't no way to do nothing we can do but get nuked. It's clear that I don't know if you remember. I did a video. People can look way back when, and people said, "Well, how are they going to leave Ukraine? How will they get out of that?" And I said, "They'll exercise the Samsonite option. They will pack their Samsonite bags and walk away." Right? I don't think it was an accident that it was in Saudi Arabia. I think and one of the things that I read, they were talking to the Russians, apparently saying, basically, perhaps the Russians can be mediators in some of the places around the world that they're having trouble. The Russians are respected, in the Middle East. They have Sergei Lavrov is truly a real diplomat, right? And he has connections, particularly in and they have that alliance with Iran. Okay. I think they're going to try to get the Russians to bail their chestnuts out of the fire in the Middle East. I think they're going to say to the Saudis, and look, you guys got money. We really don't, but we want to fake it. We're faking like we do. You guys actually have money. You got Saudi Aramco, who conspicuously the CEO of Saudi Aramco is on the board of directors of BlackRock. But I think they're going to something like, look, and the Saudis have said, we can't normalize unless you got the two states, so, Palestinian state and all that. I think they're looking for a way out of all of this stuff. They know they're backed into a corner and they lost. They lost there, they lost here, and the board of directors is coming and saying, you got to get us out of this mess. I think they go to the Russians and the Saudis and they say, what can we do? Do you have money? You got the money. Saudis, you rebuild. Russian, you talk to Iran, you talk to the resistance, you make a deal and say they'll rebuild the Palestinians. They're going to have a state. Let's get this deal together so we can get out of here. I think that's something like that is being discussed. Do you think I'm out in left field on that? What do you think?
I think you're right, because, we already saw these hints that Trump wants to cut down the military budget by 50%. Cutting down the military budget by 50% means retreat.
Yes.
From the outreaches of the empire. Maybe he's gonna try to safeguard the Western Hemisphere to himself, but he definitely has to withdraw from the outreaches of the empire. And the outreach of the empire is that ridge around, here in Western Asia.
Yes.
And so if he withdraws willy-nilly, Israel is gonna collapse very fast, and all those vessels, including the Saudis and the Emiratis and so on, will collapse under the weight of the retreat of America, the fast retreat. So he has to make a deal with the Russians, either to make sure that Russia doesn't back the axis of resistance fully, that they can take, all of this land that is there, the U.S. is being retreating from, and or to have a harmonious deal that both Russia and the United States can step back while there's, if if you have a two-state solution, which is something I'm against, I'm for one state for everybody to have
Right.
equal rights and no ethnic or religious, supremacy over anybody. But even if you have just a two-state solution right now, that will diffuse much of the fights in the whole region, in North Africa and Western Asia, and at least will give us a breathing time to get to the one-state solution without having a war that could bring all of humanity down with it. And so I think, Trump is, with his hubris, big words about ethnic, pushing the cousins out and all of that, maybe he's trying to appease or distract the Zionist while he sits on the table here. If he sits on the table here with Russia, everything's on the table. It's not only Ukraine. And I do hope that Russia finds a way to help end the war here in the region and give us a few decades of peace here so we can rebuild. It's been 100 years of wasting all our resources in the region to try to save Palestine. People need a breather. I don't know if it's going to work out, if the Zionists will let Trump. There could be a Ukrainian or Zionists, which are the same almost, the Nazis and the Zionists. They could assassinate Trump. We don't know. Something could happen like that if both the Nazis and the Zionists feel that they are going to be thrown off the boat.
And I'll say this, I've studied the Russians for many years, long before I was at Sputnik. And my mentor was Paul Robeson Jr., who was a guy who, Paul Robeson's story, right, with Russia. So the Russians are very bureaucratic. You know what I mean? And the Russians and the Chinese, what do they want? It doesn't, I'll put it like that. With the Russians and the Chinese, it doesn't have to be just. It has to be stable. They're about stability. You may look at it and say, that's not just because these people aren't getting the rights the way they want. And those people aren't the rights the way they want. Sure, the Russians and the Chinese, particularly the Russians, they want a stable region. If you think, look at it, how the Russians want it. Number one, you've got these Gulf state monarchs. That's not just, is it? But Russia's in OPEC. And they want the flow of oil and the price of oil to be controllable throughout the world. People in charge of countries that they can deal with and they can bargain with. There's no wars in the region. They've kind of starting to get Iran and Saudi Arabia. So if you're them, you may not love the Saudis or the Iranians. Who cares? But you don't want the Iranians to be blowing up the Saudi oil infrastructure, because now that's instability. You know what I mean? From their perspective, it's not about justice or injustice. It's not about good or bad or right or wrong. The Russians are, we need stability in the region. And that way, and the Chinese, hey, we get a lot of oil out of that region. That's the lifeblood of all of our industry, stability. And I think the Russians and the Chinese, as they come in, their game is going to be, how can we stabilize the region so that we don't have war in the region, so that their interests in the region, which are many, are about what? Stability. The Russians want to have that OPEC plus one. They want to have people that they can meet with from the UAE and Saudi and blah, and sit down at the table, and we'll come to Moscow and we'll be there for their May 9th celebrations and sign off, and Putin will come here and they'll fly multicolored, red, white, and blue ribbons all over, and all of these things will happen, and there will be stability, and there won't be any mass problems, and everybody makes money and eats, and hopefully everybody, you understand what I'm saying? These great world powers, the tradition of the US and the neocons has been what? To create chaos, to maintain chaos in an area, and then to thrive in that chaos, to destroy Libya. Why do you destroy Libya? So we can come in and steal all the oil and loot the oil while everybody else is saying they're slave trading. To destroy Syria. Why? So everybody's looking at the head choppers and all the crazy stuff. Why? So the US and Turkey and whoever can loot the Syrian oil and the wheat. Where the Russians are, we want stability. And then we can say the prices are stable. Then we can say the market is stable. So I think we may move into a time where justice isn't the issue for these people, but stability is. And if you live in the area, you can start with stability. You can work from there. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, your thoughts on that? Do you think I'm onto something here?
Yes, you are. And I hope, these meetings come to fruition with something that is beyond just Ukraine. And I think, hearing the U.S. talk about cutting down the military budget and also cutting down the nuclear weapons, this opens the talk about nuclear weapons that the Israelis have, that could, be out of control of any major power if the Zionists go crazy. So the future, while it's chaotic at this moment, we're in a critical moment in history where a lot of things are going to happen. In the last year and a half, more movement happened on the human trajectory than the last 80 years before it. And we're now going to see in the next year or two fast movement. And both Russia, China, and the US have to moderate these changes that are happening in ways that don't destabilize the whole world, or you have actors that come out of control that are not happy with things. Like right now, we're seeing the British and the French and Germans going crazy. They could do damage. Yes, they can't defeat Russia, but they could do damage in the path towards stability on a global scale. And Palestine is the biggest open wound on the planet. And the only way we can have stability on a global scale is to solve it somehow.
Yeah, I think they're yapping dogs, and when they yap at their masters, at some point, you ever seen this where some dog yaps at its masters and the master kicks the dog and the dog goes flat and hits the ground? I think one of the things that was an indicator to me was recently Rubio. They're making all this noise, and the board of directors of the U.S. That's what I call them. Forget Trump. The board of directors are ignoring them. And Rubio said, well, when we get this deal, and this is what he said, the West is going to have to drop sanctions. He didn't say the U.S. Okay. At some point, they know they're aggravating, let them yap. At some point, they're going to kick that little yappy dog, whap! And Europe's going to go flying through the air and hit the ground. And then it's going to do what his master says. Well, I think they're going to get this deal in Ukraine or with Russians. And when they get it, as you said, they've got to clear up the Middle East thing. They've got to get a deal with Iran. Look, Iran, and I think wisely, they keep saying, you guys keep pushing us, we might have to get a nuke. They're not saying they're going to get a nuke. If you keep pushing us, we might have to do it. We might have to reconsider fatwa. We might have to. That's good. I think the Russians can then use that to get a deal, and maybe to push towards the dealing with the nuclear issue with Israel. But at some point, I think when they get whatever they have decided they're going to get with the Russians, they're going to call Keir Starmer and Macron and all of those people into a room and say, shut up. This is what you're going to do. We'll cut off your oil. We'll cut off your imports. We will cut off your LNG gas. We'll cut off everything. We'll cut off your testicles, basically. And you don't want that to happen. And
and then you'll be like Macron's wife.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So at some point, I think they call the yappy dogs in and they put them in their place. And when they do, those little yappy dogs, didn't Putin say it? He said at some point they'll be brought to heel. At some point their masters will tell them what to do, and they will shut up and they will do it, because what alternative do they have?
Yeah, I think the only ones that are out of this group that still think that they can do something, or that they're in control, or they're better, are the Israeli Zionists. And that's where I think the danger lies, that at any moment the Zionists can do a lot of damage, both inside the US and on the ground here, if they feel that they're being pressured by the United States. But that's another, I think, a subject for another day. It's a long story.
Yeah. And even then, Israel, a lot of people don't know this, is a big place for money laundering. You know what I mean? You have a lot of very, very rich Zionists around the world who hide their money and their crimes and stuff like that, and they go to Israel and hide. So the people who really have the money stuff, and let's face it, these tech bros, the people that own, the Musk and all that, they know where everything is. Digitally, all the money hidden and everything, they know where everything is. They can call anybody and say, well, I think you should do this. No, we're not. It's kind of funny that you transferred $2 billion from the cartels in Eastern Europe to here and this and that and that. Be a shame if that came out, wouldn't it? Be a shame if your accounts closed. What are they going to do? The billionaire Zionists, not Zionists. What have you heard from Miriam? Everyone's like, Miriam Adelson, she owns Trump. I haven't heard a word out of her.
No,
I have not a peep, because the people that we're talking about when it comes to the digital power, Amazon stores digital information for the CIA. They got it all, buddy. They got all your stuff, and they can shut down anybody. Bezos, Musk, those guys. You got iPhones, don't you? Apple, Tim Cook. Oh, you're running around with a bunch of iPhones, aren't you, Zionist billionaires? Everything you've said, every text used, they got it all, and they can shut down anybody. There is Netanyahu, you name it. They got it all. And when these tech bros tell people to do something, it's my opinion here. Maybe I'm being a conspiracy theorist. They can shut down whoever they want to. And if they say to the most powerful Zionist it is, you're going to shut down, shut up, and do what we're told, I suspect they'll have to do it.
Oh yes, oh yes. The technocrats right now are in control. It's a new age, a new class of that is taking control, and it's the inauguration of Trump was the pivotal moment that showed us this shift from the old monies to this new class of giants that control all this technology.
Yep. Well, okay, everybody, don't forget, Laith has a great site. You can see it right down under his name. It's freepalestine.video. Make sure you go there. Don't just go there go to the order. Go there because they actually, for whatever reason you go to the video at the great work, you'll be there for hours looking at all the stuff they're doing. You can learn a lot. So go to freepalestine.video. And of course, while you're there, please donate. Remember, you can become a monthly donor there, and you can help their good work. Thanks a lot, Laith Marouf. Thanks a lot, everyone. Share this on all your social media platforms. Like, subscribe. And of course, for just like $3 or $4 a month, you can become a member of the channel. Please join the channel. Thanks. We're out.